The storm raged outside, howling like a beast, determined to tear the world apart. Inside the small, dimly lit cabin, a man sat hunched over a flickering laptop, his breath visible in the cold air. The ancient radiator groaned in protest, barely keeping the chill at bay. He cursed under his breath, pulling another blanket around his shoulders. "Working from home is great," he muttered sarcastically, his fingers stiff from the cold. "No commute, no problem." His name was Ethan, a software developer who had chosen solitude over the chaos of city life. The cabin, nestled deep in the woods, was his refuge, a place where he could work in peace, far from the noise and distractions of the world. But tonight, the peace was shattered by the relentless storm, and the cold was seeping into his bones. A sudden, thunderous boom shook the cabin, rattling the windows and sending Ethan's laptop sliding off his knees. He jumped to his feet, heart pounding. What the hell was that? He whispered, peering through the frost-covered window. The world outside was a blur of swirling snow and darkness. He saw nothing, but the sound had been too close to ignore. Then came the pounding at the door, urgent, desperate. Ethan hesitated. No one should be out in this weather. The local news had been broadcasting emergency alerts all day, warning people to stay indoors. But the pounding continued, growing louder and more frantic. Against his better judgment, Ethan opened the door. The wind howled, sending a blast of icy air into the cabin. Standing on his doorstep was a figure that made his blood run cold. She was tall, her skin a deep shade of violet, her silver hair whipping around her face in the wind. Her eyes, golden slits with vertical pupils, glowed faintly in the darkness. She was dressed in a thin, metallic bodysuit that clung to her form, offering no protection against the cold. "Help," she rasped, her voice deep and commanding despite her obvious distress. "I'm freezing." Ethan stared, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. An alien. A real, live alien. Every instinct told him to slam the door, but the desperation in her eyes stopped him. Whatever she was suffering. "Get in," he said, stepping back to give her space. She stumbled through the doorway, dropping to her knees once inside. Even in the dim light, Ethan could see her trembling uncontrollably. "Human," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm freezing. We must warm up in your sleeping cocoon immediately." Ethan blinked. "My what?" "Your sleeping cocoon," she repeated, looking around frantically. Finally, she pointed down the hall. "Bed. Now." "Whoa, slow down," Ethan said, raising his hands. "Let me get you some hot tea first, or maybe a blanket." The alien snarled, revealing teeth slightly sharper than human standard. "No time. Body heat only solution." She lunged forward and grabbed his wrist. Despite her weakened state, her grip was like iron. "Show me." Ethan tried to pull away, but her fingers only tightened. "Look, lady." "Kira," she snapped. "Elite warrior of the Telvar 9th Squadron, and I will die in your dwelling without proper heat transfer." Her desperation seemed genuine, and Ethan realized her shivering had intensified. Fine tremors ran through her entire body, and her breathing had grown labored. "Fine." He relented. "Bathroom first. Hot shower." Kira shook her head violently. "No water. Dangerous in this state." "Dangerous," Ethan repeated. "It's just water." "For Telvar, extreme temperature changes can trigger shock," she said, struggling to speak now. "Please, human." "Ethan," he said. "My name is Ethan." "Ethan, human," she managed, stumbling as she tried to stand. "Help me." Against his better judgment, Ethan led her down the hall to his bedroom. The moment they entered, Kira's eyes fixed on his bed with its rumpled sheets and heavy comforter. "Primitive," she commented, "but will suffice." Before Ethan could respond, she began peeling off her metallic bodysuit. "Whoa!" Ethan spun around. "What are you doing?" "Removing barrier," she said matter-of-factly. "Skin-to-skin contact required for maximum heat transfer." Ethan kept his back turned, his face burning. That's not how we do things on Earth. Your planet's customs irrelevant to my survival, Kira stated. He heard the rustle of fabric being tossed aside, followed by the creak of his bed. Remove your coverings and join me. Ethan turned slightly, keeping his eyes averted. Kira had burrowed under his comforter, but her bare purple shoulders were visible above the blanket line. Look, he said carefully. On Earth, getting into bed together naked, it implies something specific. Kira's golden eyes narrowed. What does it imply? Romance. Intimacy, Ethan said, feeling ridiculous explaining this to an alien. Inefficient system, Kira said. On Telvar, we prioritize survival over primitive taboos. It's not primitive, Ethan protested. It's... He stopped himself. Never mind. I'll get you more blankets. Insufficient, Kira said, her voice cracking with desperation. My species evolved on a planet where the average temperature exceeds 50 of your Celsius units. This frozen wasteland will kill me without direct heat. Ethan hesitated. She did look genuinely ill, her purple skin taking on an ashen undertone, and her lips were now definitely blue. Fine, he conceded, but I'm keeping my clothes on. Kira hissed with frustration, but didn't object further. Ethan cautiously slid under the covers, maintaining as much distance as possible. The moment he was settled, Kira closed the gap, pressing her body against his. Ethan stiffened at the contact. Her skin was ice cold, much colder than he'd expected. Jesus, he muttered. You really are freezing. Told you, she mumbled, pressing closer. Not accustomed to planets with solid water falling from sky. You mean snow, Ethan said. Snow, she repeated, testing the word. On Telvar, water is precious. Here, it falls from sky as cold weapons. Ethan almost laughed. They're not weapons, they're just frozen water droplets. Feels like attack, Kira insisted, her shivering gradually subsiding as she absorbed his body heat. Her breathing slowed, becoming more regular. Your thermal output is adequate. Gee, thanks, Ethan said dryly. They lay in awkward silence for several minutes. Ethan tried to focus on anything but the feeling of her skin against his t-shirt or the way her silver hair tickled his chin. Why are you here? He finally asked. On Earth, I mean. Kira tensed against him. Exile, she said shortly. My ship crashed during descent. Navigation systems failed in your atmosphere. Exile? Ethan asked. What did you do? She was quiet so long that Ethan thought she might not answer. I defied our council of elders, questioned traditions, refused to accept my designated role. Which was? Political marriage, she said, the words clipped. To unite squadrons. They kick you off the planet for not wanting an arranged marriage? Ethan asked incredulously. Telvar society values order above individual desire, Kira explained, her voice hardening. I was to be an example. Ethan digested this. So you're a rebel. I am a warrior, she corrected firmly. First in my squadron. I earned my rank through combat excellence, not through becoming some squadron leader's sixth mate. Sixth, Ethan couldn't hide his shock. Telvar males of high status collect females of exceptional genetics, she explained, as if discussing the weather. I was considered exceptional. I can see why, Ethan blurted, then immediately regretted it. Kira shifted to look at him, her golden eyes studying his face intently. You find my form appealing. I didn't mean. Ethan stumbled over his words. That came out wrong. Her lips curved into what might have been a smile. Human males are single-mated. Some are. Some aren't, Ethan said, desperate to change the subject. How long will you need to warm up? Several of your Earth hours, Kira replied, settling back against him. Perhaps until your son returns. Ethan sighed. Great. You object to providing life-saving heat. There was a dangerous edge to her voice. No, This is weird, okay? I don't normally cuddle with alien women I just met. Cuddle, she tested the word. This, She gestured vaguely at their position. Physical closeness, Ethan explained. Ah, on Telvar, this is survival practice. Nothing more. She paused. Though I understand if you find my presence stimulating. Ethan choked. That's not. I don't. Kira made a sound that might have been a laugh. Your physiological responses are similar to Telvar males. Interesting. Ethan decided that silence was his best defense and closed his eyes, hoping she would do the same. Eventually, her breathing deepened, and he realized she had fallen asleep. Despite the strangeness of the situation, exhaustion claimed him too. A knock at the door interrupted them. Cover yourself, Ethan whispered urgently, suddenly aware that Kira was still essentially naked beneath the comforter. And try to look human. She glared at him, but retreated to the bedroom, while Ethan answered the door, his mind racing with the implications of what she'd just revealed. If alien hunters were coming to Earth, this was going to be a lot more complicated than sharing body heat. Mike's visit turned out to be mercifully brief. Just a neighbor checking in after the storm and offering to clear Ethan's driveway with his snowblower. Ethan barely managed coherent responses, hyper-aware of the alien warrior hiding in his bedroom. As soon as Mike left, Kira emerged, still wrapped in the comforter. We need to find you some clothes, Ethan said, trying not to stare at her bare purple shoulders. You can't keep walking around naked. Your primitive thermal coverings will not suffice, she declared. They're better than nothing, Ethan replied, digging through his drawers. He pulled out a large hoodie and sweatpants with a drawstring waist. Try these. Kira examined the clothing with obvious disdain but reluctantly dropped the comforter to put them on. Ethan spun around quickly, but not before catching a glimpse of smooth purple skin that sent his pulse racing. These constraints are unacceptable, she complained behind him. They inhibit my movement and suppress my form. Ethan turned back to find her tugging at the hoodie, which admittedly did little to suppress her curves. If anything, the way the soft fabric clung to her body was almost more distracting than her nakedness had been. It's just until we figure something else out, he said, his voice betraying him with a slight crack. Over the next few days, a strange routine developed. Ethan worked remotely during the day while Kira explored his cabin, criticizing Earth technology and demanding heat at regular intervals. The temperature outside remained well below freezing, making her increasingly irritable. This dwelling is like a Telvar ice prison, she complained on the third morning, huddled directly in front of the space heater Ethan had purchased online with rush delivery. I've cranked the heat as high as it will go, Ethan said, watching her shiver despite the 3 layers of clothing she now wore. Any hotter, and I'll melt. Weak human biology, she muttered, then suddenly fixed him with those golden eyes. Come here. Ethan hesitated. This was becoming a pattern, her imperious demands for his body heat, followed by his increasingly weak resistance. I'm working, he gestured to his laptop. You'll work better knowing I haven't perished from cold, she countered, extending her hand. Proximity. Now. With a sigh that was more for show than genuine reluctance, Ethan joined her by the heater. Immediately, she pressed against his side, guiding his arm around her shoulders. Your thermal output is the only tolerable thing about this frozen rock, she said, relaxing against him. Ethan tried to focus on his laptop screen rather than the feeling of her body against his or the subtle scent that reminded him of cinnamon and something alien he couldn't identify. Happy to be of service, he mumbled, knowing he was in serious trouble. Despite her abrasive personality and literal alien nature, he found himself increasingly drawn to her. It wasn't just her exotic beauty. It was her fierce confidence, her adaptability, and those rare moments when vulnerability broke through her warrior facade. By the end of the week, the weather warmed slightly, just enough for Ethan to suggest Kira experience the outside world. These foot containers are inadequate, she complained, struggling with the boots he'd lent her. They're 3 sizes too big, but they're all I have, Ethan said. Just stuff the toes with socks. Eventually, bundled in layers that made her look like a purple-faced marshmallow, Kira ventured outside with Ethan, Her reaction to actually standing in snow was immediate and dramatic. "It attacks," she shrieked, leaping backward as snow crunched beneath her boots. "This powder assaults me." "It's just frozen water," Ethan reminded her, fighting laughter. "It can't hurt you." Kira hissed as a snowflake landed on her exposed cheek, then swatted at it like a cat batting at an insect. "It burns. Why would your species choose to inhabit such a hostile environment?" "It's not always like this," Ethan explained. "We have seasons. In summer, it gets hot." "Define hot," she demanded suspiciously. "Maybe 30 degrees Celsius on a really hot day." Kira's expression fell. "That is what we consider winter temperature on Telvar." Their outdoor excursion was cut short when Kira refused to move more than 10 feet from the front door, insisting that Earth's atmosphere was actively trying to kill her. Back inside, she immediately began shedding layers. "These coverings restrict movement while providing minimal thermal protection," she declared, struggling to remove the puffy coat. "Inefficient design." "They work fine for humans," Ethan said, helping her with a stuck zipper. Their faces were suddenly inches apart as the zipper freed, and for a moment, neither moved. "Your pupils dilate when you look at me," she observed quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. "Do they?" "A biological response indicating attraction in many species," she continued, her voice dropping lower. "Telvar have similar indicators." "It's just the lighting," Ethan lied poorly. Kira's lips curved. "You are a terrible deceiver, Ethan Human." Before he could respond, she grabbed his hand and placed it firmly on her hip. "I require warming," she stated, though her tone had changed from demanding to something more inviting. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. "Kira, your thermal signature increases," she noted, stepping closer. "Is this uncomfortable for you?" "Not uncomfortable," Ethan managed. "Just complicated." "Explain." "I'm attracted to you," he admitted, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "But you're literally an alien, and you're only here because you crashed, and we barely know each other. And—" "You talk excessively when nervous," Kira interrupted. "On Telvar, attraction is acknowledged and addressed, not hidden behind excessive verbalization." Ethan stared at her, suddenly at a loss for words. "I am cold," she said simply, her hand still holding his in place. "Warm me." The familiar phrase had taken on new meaning, and Ethan found himself unable to resist any longer. He gently pulled her closer, his other hand moving to her back. "Is this better?" he asked softly. "Marginally," she replied, but the slight catch in her breath suggested otherwise. The days passed in a strange, almost surreal rhythm. Ethan and Kira settled into a routine that felt both alien and oddly domestic. By day, Ethan worked on his coding projects, while Kira explored the cabin, poking at his belongings with a mix of curiosity and disdain. By night, they shared the bed, their bodies pressed together for warmth, though the tension between them had shifted from purely survival-based to something more complicated. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the cabin was bathed in the warm glow of the fireplace, Kira sat cross-legged on the floor, examining Ethan's laptop with a furrowed brow. Her silver hair fell in loose waves around her face, and the oversized hoodie she wore slipped off one shoulder, revealing a glimpse of her violet skin. "This device," she said, tapping the screen with a long, slender finger. "It is primitive, yet functional. Your species has achieved much with limited resources." "Thanks, I think," Ethan said, looking up from his own work. "What are you doing, anyway?" "Research," she replied, her golden eyes flicking to his. "I am studying your world. If I am to survive here, I must understand its customs, its technology, its weaknesses." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Weaknesses? Every world has them," Kira said matter-of-factly. "Even yours." Before Ethan could respond, a sudden sharp noise cut through the quiet evening. It was a low hum, almost imperceptible, but it made the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stand on end. Kira's head snapped up, her body tensing like a coiled spring. "What was that?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kira didn't answer immediately. She rose to her feet in one fluid motion, her golden eyes scanning the room as if she could see through the walls. "They're here," she said finally, her voice low and urgent. "Who's here?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Telvar investigators," Kira replied, her tone grim. "They've tracked me." Ethan's heart began to race. "What do we do?" Kira moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The hum grew louder, more insistent, like the distant rumble of an approaching storm. "We must leave. Now." "Leave?" Ethan echoed. "Where are we supposed to go? It's freezing out there, and you can barely handle the cold as it is." "Staying here is not an option," Kira said, turning to face him. Her expression was fierce, but Ethan thought he detected a flicker of fear in her eyes. "If they find me, they will take me back to Telvar. And if they discover you've been aiding me, they will not hesitate to eliminate you." Ethan swallowed hard. "Okay, so we run. But where?" Kira hesitated, her gaze flicking to the laptop on the floor. "You said there is a lake nearby." "Frozen, yes." "Yeah," Ethan said, nodding. "About a mile east of here, but it's not exactly a tropical paradise." "It will have to do," Kira said, already moving toward the door. "The ice will mask my thermal signature, and the cold will slow them down. It is our best chance." Ethan grabbed his coat and boots, his mind racing. This was insane. They were about to venture out into the freezing wilderness, pursued by alien hunters, with no plan and no guarantee of survival. But what choice did they have? "Wait," he said, stopping Kira as she reached for the door. "We need supplies. Food, water, blankets, and a weapon, if we can find one." Kira nodded, her expression softening slightly. "You are more resourceful than I expected, Ethan Human." "Thanks," Ethan said dryly. "Now let's move before they get here." They worked quickly, gathering what they could from the cabin. Ethan stuffed a backpack with canned food, a water bottle, and a first aid kit, while Kira wrapped herself in as many layers as she could manage. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the hunting knife he kept in a drawer by the bed. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "Ready?" he asked, slinging the backpack over his shoulders. Kira nodded, her golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Let's go." They slipped out the back door, the cold hitting them like a wall. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they made their way through the trees, the hum of the Telvar ship growing louder with every step. Ethan's breath came in short, visible puffs, and he could see Kira shivering despite the layers of clothing. "How far to the lake?" Kira asked, her voice tight with strain. "Not far," Ethan replied, though the distance felt much greater in the freezing darkness. "Just keep moving." They pressed on, the forest around them eerily silent except for the occasional snap of a twig or the rustle of snow falling from a branch. Ethan's mind raced with questions. How had the Telvar found them so quickly? What would they do if they were caught? And what would happen to Kira if they were separated? The hum of the ship grew louder, and Ethan glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see a squad of alien soldiers emerging from the trees. But the forest was empty, the only movement the swirling snow in the wind. "There," Kira said suddenly, pointing ahead. Through the trees, Ethan could see the glint of moonlight on ice. The lake. They reached the edge of the frozen expanse, the ice stretching out before them like a vast, unbroken plain. Kira hesitated, her golden eyes scanning the surface. "Is it safe?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Safe enough," Kira replied, though Ethan noticed the slight tremor in her voice. "But we must move quickly. The ice will not hold our weight for long." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding as they stepped onto the frozen lake. The ice creaked beneath their feet, but it held. They moved as quickly as they dared, the cold biting at their exposed skin, and the hum of the Telvar ship growing louder with every step. "They're close," Kira said, her breath visible in the frigid air. "We need to find cover." Ethan scanned the lake, his eyes landing on a small island in the distance. "There," he said, pointing. "We can hide there." They made their way toward the island, the ice groaning ominously beneath their feet. The hum of the ship was almost deafening now, and Ethan could see lights in the sky. Bright, pulsing orbs that moved with unnatural speed. "Hurry," Kira urged, her voice tight with urgency. They reached the island, a small outcrop of rock and snow, and ducked behind a cluster of boulders. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling from the cold and the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Kira crouched beside him, her golden eyes fixed on the sky. The lights grew brighter, closer, until they were directly overhead. The hum was so loud now that it vibrated in Ethan's chest, and he could feel the ice beneath him trembling. "Stay down," Kira whispered, her hand gripping his arm. "Do not move." The lights hovered above the lake, casting an eerie glow over the ice. Ethan held his breath, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure that Telvar could hear it. The hum grew louder, more intense, and then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence was deafening. Ethan dared to peek over the boulder, his eyes widening as he saw the ship. A sleek, metallic craft that seemed to defy the laws of physics, hovering just above the ice. A hatch opened, and several figures emerged, their movements precise and deliberate. "Telvar soldiers," Kira whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're scanning for me." Ethan's mind raced. If they were caught, there was no way they could fight off a squad of armed alien soldiers. But if they stayed hidden, maybe, just maybe, they could wait them out. The soldiers moved across the ice, their movements slow and methodical. One of them stopped near the edge of the lake, its golden eyes scanning the area. Ethan held his breath, his body tense. And then, without warning, the ice beneath the soldier gave way with a loud crack. The soldier let out a guttural cry as it plunged into the freezing water, its companions rushing to its aid. "Now," Kira said, her voice urgent, "while they're distracted." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. They moved quickly and quietly, staying low to avoid detection. The soldiers were too preoccupied with their fallen comrade to notice the two figures slipping away into the night. They reached the far side of the lake, the forest looming ahead like a dark, impenetrable wall. Ethan glanced back at the Telvar ship, its lights still hovering over the ice. "We need to keep moving," Kira said, her voice firm. "They will not give up so easily." Ethan nodded, his body aching from the cold and the exertion. But he knew she was right. They couldn't stop now, not when the stakes were so high. As they disappeared into the trees, the hum of the Telvar ship faded into the distance. But Ethan knew it wasn't over. The hunt had only just begun. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and silence, the only sound the crunch of snow beneath their boots as Ethan and Kira pressed deeper into the trees. The cold was relentless, biting at their exposed skin and making every breath feel like a struggle. Kira moved with the precision of a predator, her golden eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. Ethan followed close behind, his heart pounding in his chest and his mind racing with fear and adrenaline. "How much farther?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His lungs burned with the effort of keeping up with Kira's relentless pace. "We must put as much distance between us and the lake as possible," Kira replied, her tone clipped. "The Telvar will not stop searching until they find me." Ethan glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the glowing lights of the Telvar ship breaking through the trees. But the forest was eerily still, the only movement the occasional flutter of snow falling from the branches above. "What happens if they catch us?" Ethan asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Kira's expression darkened. "If they catch me, I will be taken back to Telvar and subjected to reconditioning. a process that will strip me of my free will and force me to conform to their oppressive traditions. If they catch you, she hesitated, her golden eyes meeting his. They will see you as a threat to their order. They will not hesitate to eliminate you. Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling heavily on his shoulders. So, no pressure, huh? Kira's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. You are surprisingly resilient for a human. Most would have succumbed to fear by now. Yeah, well, fear doesn't exactly help when you're being chased by alien soldiers, Ethan muttered. Besides, I'm not about to let them take you without a fight. Kira's expression softened, and for a moment, she looked almost touched. Your loyalty is unexpected, Ethan human, but do not mistake it for foolishness. The Telvar are not to be underestimated. I'm not underestimating them, Ethan said, his voice firm. I'm just saying we're not going down without a fight. Kira studied him for a moment, her golden eyes searching his face. Then she nodded, a flicker of respect in her gaze. Very well. But if we are to survive, we must be smart. We cannot outrun them forever. So what's the plan? Ethan asked. Kira's eyes narrowed as she scanned their surroundings. We need to find a place where we can turn the tables on them. Somewhere we can use the environment to our advantage. Ethan thought for a moment, then nodded toward a distant ridge. There's a cave up there. It's small, but it's defensible, and the terrain around it is rough. Lots of rocks and ice. If we can lure them into a trap. Kira's lips curved into a predatory smile. You are full of surprises, Ethan human. Lead the way. They moved quickly and quietly, their progress slowed by the treacherous terrain. The ridge was steep and icy, and more than once, Ethan slipped, only to be caught by Kira's strong grip. Her strength was astonishing, a reminder of just how different she was from him, and how much they needed each other if they were going to survive. When they finally reached the cave, Ethan was breathing hard, his body trembling from the cold and exertion. The cave was small, barely large enough for the two of them, but it offered some protection from the elements, and more importantly, a vantage point overlooking the forest below. This will do, Kira said, her golden eyes scanning the area. We can use the terrain to our advantage. The ice and rocks will slow them down, and the narrow entrance will force them to come at us one at a time. Ethan nodded, though his stomach churned with anxiety. What's the plan? Ambush them when they get close. Precisely, Kira said, her voice cold and calculating. We will use the environment to our advantage. The cold is their weakness as much as it is mine. If we can lure them into a position where they are exposed, we can take them down. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. He wasn't a fighter. He was a programmer, a guy who spent most of his time in front of a computer screen. But he couldn't afford to hesitate now. Not when their lives were on the line. Okay, he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Let's do this. They worked quickly, setting up their makeshift defenses. Kira used her strength to move rocks and ice into strategic positions, creating barriers that would funnel the Telvar soldiers into a narrow choke point. Ethan gathered what little ammunition they had, rocks, chunks of ice, and the hunting knife he brought from the cabin. As they worked, the hum of the Telvar ship grew louder, the sound vibrating through the air like a warning. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his hands trembling as he gripped the knife. They're coming, Kira said, her voice low and urgent. Get into position. Ethan nodded, crouching behind a boulder near the cave entrance. Kira took up a position on the other side, her golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. The hum grew louder, more intense, until it felt like the very air was vibrating. And then they appeared. The Telvar soldiers moved with eerie precision, their sleek black uniforms blending into the shadows. Their golden eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and their movements were slow and deliberate as they scanned the area. Ethan counted 4 of them, each armed with what looked like some kind of energy weapon. Wait, Kira whispered, her voice barely audible. Let them get closer. Ethan held his breath, his grip tightening on the knife. The soldiers moved closer, their footsteps crunching in the snow. They were almost within range now, their golden eyes scanning the rocks and ice. Now, Kira hissed. Ethan acted on instinct, hurling a chunk of ice at the nearest soldier. It struck the soldier in the chest, causing them to stumble and lose their footing on the slippery terrain. Kira moved like lightning, leaping from her hiding place and tackling another soldier to the ground. Chaos erupted as the Telvar soldiers reacted, their movements slowed by the icy terrain. Ethan grabbed another rock and threw it, this time hitting a soldier in the head. The soldier staggered, their weapons slipping from their grasp. Kira was a whirlwind of motion, her movements fluid and precise as she disarmed another soldier and sent them sprawling into the snow. But the Telvar were not so easily defeated. One of the soldiers recovered quickly, raising their weapon and firing a burst of energy that narrowly missed Kira. "Ethan, down!" Kira shouted. Ethan dropped to the ground just as another energy blast seared the air above him. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding as he saw the soldier advancing on him, their golden eyes glowing with menace. Without thinking, Ethan lunged forward, driving the hunting knife into the soldier's side. The soldier let out a guttural cry, their body convulsing as they collapsed to the ground. Ethan stared in shock, his hands trembling as he pulled the knife free. He had never hurt anyone before, let alone killed them. But there was no time to process what he had done. Another soldier was advancing on him, their weapon raised. Before the soldier could fire, Kira appeared behind them, her movements a blur as she disarmed them, and delivered a powerful blow to their head. The soldier crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The remaining soldier hesitated, their golden eyes flicking between Ethan and Kira. For a moment, it seemed like they might retreat, but then they raised their weapon, aiming it directly at Kira. "No," Ethan shouted, throwing himself in front of her. The energy blast struck him in the chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. Pain exploded through his body, and his vision blurred as he struggled to breathe. "Ethan." Kira's voice was filled with panic, a sound he had never heard from her before. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Kira's face, her golden eyes filled with fear and something else, something that looked an awful lot like love. Ethan's world was a haze of pain and confusion. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his body heavy and unresponsive. Vague images flickered in his mind. Kira's face, her golden eyes filled with fear, the icy landscape of the forest, the Telvar soldiers advancing with their glowing weapons. He tried to move, to speak, but his limbs felt like lead, and his voice wouldn't obey. When he finally opened his eyes, he was lying on the cold, hard floor of the cave. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint, flickering light over the space. Kira was crouched beside him, her violet skin pale and her silver hair disheveled. Her golden eyes were fixed on his face, filled with an intensity that made his chest ache. "You're awake," she said, her voice tight with relief. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't survive." Ethan tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his chest made him gasp and fall back. What happened?" "You were struck by a Telvar energy blast," Kira said, her tone grim. "It should have killed you, but your body, it resisted the effects in a way I've never seen before." Ethan blinked, his mind struggling to process her words. "What do you mean?" Kira hesitated, her golden eyes flicking away for a moment. "There's something I need to tell you, Ethan. Something I should have told you sooner." Ethan's heart began to race, a sense of foreboding settling over him. "What is it?" Kira took a deep breath, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "When I first arrived on Earth, I told you I was exiled for defying the Telvar Council. That much is true. But there's more to the story." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. "What are you saying?" "I wasn't just exiled for refusing an arranged marriage," Kira said, her voice low and urgent. "I was exiled because I discovered a secret that threatens the very foundation of Telvar society." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. What kind of secret? Kira's golden eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. The Telvar Council has been lying to our people for generations. They claim that our society is built on order and tradition, but the truth is far darker. They have been experimenting on their own kind, manipulating our genetics to create a race of perfect warriors. And they've been doing it for centuries. Ethan's mind reeled, the implications of her words sinking in. You mean, they've been engineering their own people? Kira nodded, her expression grim. Yes, and I was one of their experiments. That's why I'm stronger, faster, and more resilient than most Telvar. That's why I was chosen for the 9th Squadron. But when I discovered the truth, I couldn't stay silent. I tried to expose them, but they branded me a traitor and exiled me to Earth. Ethan's chest tightened, a mixture of anger and fear coursing through him. So that's why they're after you. Not just because you defied them, but because you know their secret. Yes, Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. And now that they've found me, they won't stop until I'm silenced, and until you're eliminated. Ethan's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. That's why my body resisted the energy blast, isn't it? Because I've been exposed to your genetics. Kira nodded, her golden eyes filled with guilt. I didn't realize it at first, but the closer we've been, the more your body has adapted to mine. The energy blast should have killed you, but your cells, they've started to change. You're becoming more like me. Ethan stared at her, his heart pounding. You're saying I'm turning into a Telvar? Not entirely, Kira said quickly. But your body is adapting in ways I can't fully explain. It's why you survived the blast. And it's why the Telvar will see you as a threat. Not just because you've helped me, but because you're becoming something they can't control. Ethan's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, anger, confusion. But beneath it all was a strange sense of determination. So what do we do now? Kira's expression hardened, her warrior's resolve returning. We fight back. We expose the Council's lies and free our people from their tyranny. But to do that, we need to get off this planet. We need to find a way to Telvar. Ethan's eyes widened. You're talking about going to your home world. How? Your ship is destroyed. Not entirely, Kira said, a flicker of hope in her eyes. The Telvar ship that's hunting us. It's our ticket off this planet. If we can capture it, we can use it to reach Telvar and expose the Council. Ethan's heart raced at the thought. It was insane, reckless, and probably suicidal. But what other choice did they have? Okay, he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Let's do it. Kira's lips curved into a small, determined smile. You continue to surprise me, Ethan human. But we must move quickly. The Telvar will not wait for us to make the first move. Ethan nodded, pushing himself to his feet despite the pain in his chest. Then let's not keep them waiting. They made their way through the ship, their footsteps muffled by the soft hum of the engines. The corridors were narrow and winding, and Ethan struggled to keep up with Kira's swift, silent movements. Every corner they turned, every door they passed, felt like a potential ambush. Finally, they reached the bridge. Kira peered around a corner, her golden eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. 3 soldiers, she whispered. 2 at the controls, 1 guarding the door. Ethan's heart raced. What's the plan? Kira's lips curved into a predatory smile. Distract the guard. I'll handle the others. Ethan nodded, though his hands were trembling. He took a deep breath, then stepped into the open, raising his hands in surrender. Hey, don't shoot. The guard turned, their golden eyes widening in surprise. Before they could react, Kira moved like lightning, disarming them and delivering a powerful blow to their head. The guard crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The other 2 soldiers turned, their weapons raised, but Kira was already on them. She moved with a speed and precision that left Ethan breathless, disarming 1 soldier and tackling the other to the ground. Within moments, the bridge was theirs. Quickly, Kira said, her voice urgent. We need to disable the ship's tracking systems and set a course for Telvar. Ethan nodded, moving to the control panel. His hands trembled as he worked, his mind racing with fear and adrenaline. The controls were unlike anything he had ever seen, but Kira guided him through the process with calm precision. There, Kira said, her golden eyes gleaming with triumph. We're clear. The Telvar won't be able to track us now. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. So we're really doing this. We're going to Telvar. Kira's expression softened, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. We are. But this is only the beginning, Ethan. The real fight is ahead of us. Ethan nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Then let's finish this. The ship's engines hummed to life, the vibrations coursing through the floor beneath their feet. Ethan stared out the view screen as the frozen landscape of Earth faded into the distance, replaced by the vast expanse of space. They were on their way to Telvar, and nothing would ever be the same again. The journey to Telvar was a blur of tension and preparation. The ship's interior was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth of Earth. Kira spent hours poring over the ship's systems, familiarizing herself with its controls and defenses. Ethan, meanwhile, tried to wrap his mind around the enormity of what they were about to do. They weren't just infiltrating an alien world. They were planning to overthrow its ruling council. As the ship approached Telvar, the planet came into view through the view screen. It was a harsh, arid world, its surface dominated by sprawling cities of gleaming metal and glass. The sky was a deep burnt orange, and the air shimmered with heat. Ethan stared at it, his stomach churning with a mixture of awe and dread. This is it, Kira said, her voice steady but her golden eyes filled with determination. Once we land, there's no turning back. Ethan nodded, his throat dry. What's the plan? Kira's lips curved into a small, grim smile. We infiltrate the council's stronghold, expose their lies, and rally the people to our cause. It won't be easy, but it's the only way to free Telvar from their tyranny. Ethan swallowed hard. And what about me? I'm not exactly a warrior. Kira's expression softened. You've already proven yourself more than capable, Ethan. Your ingenuity and courage have gotten us this far. Trust yourself. The ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, the heat causing the hull to shudder. Ethan gripped the edge of his seat, his heart pounding as the city below grew larger and larger. Finally, the ship touched down in a secluded area on the outskirts of the city, its engines humming to a stop. We need to move quickly, Kira said, rising from her seat. The council will have detected our arrival by now. They slipped out of the ship, the heat of Telvar hitting them like a wall. The air was dry and oppressive, and the ground beneath their feet was cracked and barren. Kira led the way, her movements swift and sure as they made their way toward the city. The streets were eerily quiet, the towering buildings casting long shadows in the orange light. The few Telvar they passed moved with a mechanical precision, their golden eyes dull and lifeless. Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. These people had been stripped of their individuality, their freedom, all in the name of order. This way, Kira whispered, gesturing toward a narrow alley. The council's stronghold is just ahead. They moved quickly and quietly, staying in the shadows to avoid detection. The stronghold loomed ahead, a massive structure of gleaming metal and glass. Its walls were lined with guards, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. How do we get in? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kira's golden eyes narrowed as she studied the stronghold. There's a service entrance on the lower level. It's less heavily guarded. If we can get inside, we can make our way to the central chamber. Ethan nodded, his heart racing. Let's do it. They slipped through the shadows, their movements swift and silent. The service entrance was just ahead, a small, unassuming door guarded by a single soldier. Kira moved like a shadow, disarming the guard and rendering them unconscious before they even had a chance to react. "In here," Kira whispered, gesturing for Ethan to follow. They slipped inside, the interior of the stronghold cold and sterile. The walls were lined with glowing panels, and the air hummed with the sound of machinery. Kira led the way, her golden eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The room was vast and imposing, its walls lined with screens displaying data and images. At the center of the room stood the Council of Elders, their golden eyes gleaming with malice. "Kira of the 9th Squadron," one of the elders said, their voice cold and mocking. "We knew you would return." Kira stepped forward, her expression fierce. "Your tyranny ends here. The people of Telvar will no longer be enslaved by your lies." The elders laughed, a sound that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "You are but one warrior, Kira. What can you hope to accomplish against us?" "She's not alone," Ethan said, stepping forward. His voice trembled, but his resolve was firm. "The people of Telvar deserve to know the truth, and we're here to make sure they hear it." The elders' laughter died, their golden eyes narrowing. "You dare challenge us, human?" "I do," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Because what you're doing is wrong, and it's time someone stood up to you." Kira's lips curved into a small, proud smile. "The people of Telvar will rise against you. Your reign of tyranny is over." The elders' expressions darkened, and they raised their hands, summoning a wave of energy that surged toward Kira and Ethan. Kira moved quickly, shielding Ethan with her body as the energy struck her. She staggered but remained standing, her golden eyes blazing with defiance. "Now, Ethan," she shouted. Ethan didn't hesitate. He moved to the control panel, his hands flying over the controls. The screens around the room flickered, then came to life, displaying images and data that exposed the Council's lies. The people of Telvar, watching from their homes and workplaces, saw the truth for the first time. The elders roared in fury, their power surging as they tried to stop him. But Kira was there, her movements swift and precise, as she fought to protect him. The room was filled with the clash of energy and the sound of their struggle. Finally, Ethan activated the final command. The screens went dark, and a loud, resonant tone echoed through the stronghold. The elders froze, their golden eyes wide with shock. "It's over," Kira said, her voice steady. "The people know the truth. Your reign of tyranny is at an end." The elders collapsed, their power fading as the truth spread through the city. The people of Telvar, freed from the Council's control, began to rise up, their voices united in a cry for freedom. Kira turned to Ethan, her golden eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something that looked an awful lot like love. "We did it," she said, her voice soft. Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "We did." As the people of Telvar celebrated their newfound freedom, Kira and Ethan stood together, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, and as they looked out over the city, they knew that their journey was far from over. But whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.